Hello and a warm welcome, very warm welcome again here in Halle at the festival venue and in the New World Disorder. That will be at least the topic for the next 3 weeks here at the festival. My name is Daniela Silvestrin. Together with my colleague Sandra Naumann, I was curating this conference program, and I'm super happy now to announce the second session of today and the conference in general with my two guests, Marta Peirano and Sarah Grant. I'm really happy that both came here and also with a great idea and fun format for the next 90 minutes. The session is called By Land, Sea and Air, Infrastructures in the Age of Platform Capitalism. And Marta is a journalist and thinker specialized in the field of technology and power. And Sarah is a media artist and educator. And the two of them will now engage us in reflecting about different types and forms of infrastructures on which many of the essential flows of our society's bodies, goods, and data are based. So it will have an interesting new format, and I will leave the explanation to Marta to tell you how it will work. Also because we again invite you very much and warmly to contribute via the chat on the one hand, and also to send in your own proposals for the two to discuss. So this just is an announcement, and the information, you will see it online, where to send your proposals if you would like. And last but not least, just two quick hints for the online listeners. It was the chat, and also there's a simultaneous translation, so you'll always find two windows if you prefer to listen to the session in a different language. And that's all from my side, and a warm welcome again, and I hand over to Marta, and have fun.
Well, thank you, Daniela, and thank you everyone here for being here at this time of day, which is probably the hottest ever. And, I am delighted to introduce what we have called a game of choking pong. Because we were thinking that, we've been talking infrastructure for a while now, and we might need a bit of spark in the delivery. And so the game of choking pong would be a game in which we will serve 5 images that each server will introduce. And then we will basically play around with them for as long as we can, or we can stand to. And then at the end, we will hopefully receive other pongs from the audience, either present or online. And so, being the year that it is, I will start with the image that inspired the game, which is, probably the most famous boat in history by now. This is, of course, a boat called the Ever Given that blocked the Suez Canal for a total of 6 days. In that time, food rot, 20 ships taking hundreds of thousands of live animals were stuck, and of course, from Romania, Spain, and South America, my notes say, were going to the Persian Gulf, and they were left to die as, of course, their feed and water reserves began to run out. Oil tankers also got stuck, and in general, it's been said that it costed the global economy an estimated of $400 million per hour, which is a lot. The cost of shipping products was already doubled during the 6 days that this nice boat was blocking the canal, and delays to the global manufacturing supply chain, especially the auto industry, will start hitting consumers by now. And it turns out, and here's the interesting point, that the Suez Canal is only one of the 4 biggest trade choke points in the planet. There is, of course, the Panama Canal. the Strait of Hormuz and the Malacca Strait. So the Strait of Hormuz is a sea passage between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman that leads to the Indian Ocean, and it seems to be the most critical choke point for oil and gas. And more than oversized container ships, is particularly vulnerable to the Middle East geopolitics, which are, as we all know, a bit troubling. And neighbors involve Saudi Arabia, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Iraq. So what could go wrong? The Strait of Malacca, which was unknown to me, links Asia and the Middle East and Europe, carrying 40% of global trade, which is almost 1,000 ships per day and 16 million barrels per day of oil. It's 900 kilometers long, but apparently there is one narrow point that is that leaves 2.7 kilometers wide. So this boat wouldn't make it. And so this is my first bowl to discuss, like how in the age of capitalism would we say the fact there is like four throats that involve ship containers full of microchips and other materials would be important for us.
Yeah, indeed. And one point too that when they were trying to unstick the boat, that I feel like there's a story or at least a joke or a metaphor in there was how it was the fleets of tugboats, of smaller boats, which were trying to unstick the boat. And while I read somewhere that at one point the tugboats had managed to finally move the boat 2 inches, and there was like a party for this. So yeah.
I mean, I think we all know what photo we're talking about. Of course, we wanted to be careful about photos and copyright in this talk, because I've been told that Germany is growing an interesting flock of lawyers that are surveilling
internet conferences in the search of possible suits, copyright suits, to scholars and public speakers in general. So we don't have that photo, but you all know which photo it is. It's like the photo where the big whale of a boat is being somehow caressed with a little thing that looks like an ant.
Yes.
Yeah. And also not to jump too far ahead of our points, but it actually, as we'll hear later when I'm talking about our next choking points, the fact that there's these 4 major thoroughways, but 4, which are the main routes for global goods to be able to trade across the planet. We see similar things happening indeed with the internet, which we can talk about when we do.
When we do,
yes.
Exactly. But there's one important point, and the reason why I wanted to start with this one is that it is visible from space. So it is kind of unlikely and unusual in this time and age that one of these pathways that concentrates way too much traffic for its own good is actually visible at all. I mean, we're going to go to the next slide. Come on, Sarah.
Okay. I will serve the next slide.
Which is exactly the opposite. Oh, that's not the next slide. Yes. Which is exactly the opposite problem, no?
Yeah. So, indeed, what we're looking at here is a map of the undersea cables, where they lie on the ocean floor. This is the internet, basically, the physical manifestation, or at least a slice of the physical manifestation of the internet, as it's linking the land masses for the exchange of the world's internet traffic. So when we think about the internet, of course, like we think about it, I think mostly as this intangible thing. We mostly relate to the internet in terms of wireless, Wi-Fi networks, which are intangible. But in fact, the internet is a very physical entity, as is represented here by this undersea cable map. But it's more than just the fiber optic cables. of course, which make up the physical body of the internet. Where these cables pop up out of land are internet exchange points. And these are basically houses or buildings where the world's regional networks meet to exchange traffic. So, yeah, I mean, we have choking points for sure existing in these internet exchange points where, because just to be clear, when we send traffic over the internet, it's not, we take for granted that if we send an email from Germany, it will pop out to California, and we don't really think too much about how that works, just that it will work. But the fact of the matter is, the internet, despite being advertised as this decentralized sort of utopic place, does in fact have a heavy amount of politics and hierarchies associated with it, which I could go on more and more about, but I want to give Marta a chance to react as well.
Well, one of the things that I really like the most about these maps, because every year this wonderful resource, which is telegeography, comes up with these maps, of which I have a poster of, I think their first one, which is like 2014. It's very cute. Looks like a 19th century map. Is first of all that they resemble the 19th century infrastructure and how the internet, which is like supposedly a super contemporary thing, actually grows out of that infrastructure with its colonial power.
Indeed,
embedded.
If I could jump in to say really quickly that not only does it represent 19th century infrastructure, going back even further, if you overlay a map of the slave trade routes, it actually lines up quite a bit. So we're even going back to 15th century slave trade infrastructure. So it's actually quite problematic for many people because of this.
Yeah, and also if you look at one of the great things about the telegeography map is that you can click on every little cable and see when it was built and who built it and who owns it and all that. And so one of the interesting things is to see how after the 90s explosion of investment from governments, especially in Europe, for instance, you see that a lot of cable was laid, and it was mostly cooperatives formed in between what used to be public companies, like Deutsche Telekom, for instance, when it was public, but also Telefonica, which was publicly funded, et cetera, and how these consortiums formed the core of what was the first, serious generation of submarine cables in Europe. And one of the things that happened, for instance, was that all the little islands in Spain, which are way too small to justify the investment of a private company, were cabled. So they all have their connections. Some of them even have two. But once all those companies became privatized, then the logics between the undersea cable development changed radically, and so places that didn't have enough people living in them wouldn't get one, basically, which is something that you see, for instance, in places like Chile, where I was researching for a little bit, and I realized that everybody was fighting for the places in Chile and Argentina where you see all these cables coming through, because of course these countries, especially Chile, connect to a lot of different countries, and they are super, yummy gateways for this sort of connection. But then all the parts where only poor people live and they only have basically pieces of rock and sea are totally disconnected from the internet, and no amount of public money offered by the governments seems to be enough for just laying cable there. Nobody is interested. Everybody's fighting for those points. Nobody wants to go to those points. No? And and now the new choke point is that most of the new generation of cables are being developed not by public companies and not by governments, but by people like Google and Facebook and Amazon.
Yes. In fact, it's coincidentally, maybe or not, as we saw that before with the Suez, canal blockage, or how, as we discussed then, there's 4 main thoroughfares or passage points that that goods ship through. In fact, there happen to be 4 major companies, which have been private companies, which have been funding the new undersea cables, and these companies, of course, are Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft. So, while this map, and I'm sure that since this map has been made, there's been many more cables laid undersea. While it looks like there's all these different, routes, in fact, when it comes to who's actually funding these routes, and not just funding and building them, but also directing policy and governance and indeed as well as setting the standards for the protocols which move the data over the cables. It all comes down to really these 4 main companies. So it's something that is just important, I think, to understand that despite how diverse and decentralized we hear that the internet is, in fact, it does come down to a small set of choking points as well. Which also, I just want to say real fast, the U.S. is another choking point here, because those companies are U.S., right? And the U.S. for the last 24 years has had a far outsized presence and influence, obviously, in the development and direction of the internet. And this has created a whole other cascade of effects, like authoritarian governments then being able to justify to their people why they should have their own infrastructures, their own ISPs, which then gives them the levers to shut off internet to their entire countries as they feel like, so on and so forth. So yeah, there's a lot to discuss there, actually.
A lot to discuss.
Yeah.
Maybe we should also point out that the first choking, literal material choking point of the internet happens to be in Washington, D.C., at the outside of Washington, where what you would say the American Stasi was based, and that's why they have all these towers and this interesting infrastructure that became very attractive for the first exchange points and internet companies in the early days. So maybe let's go to the next one. That would be me. So this is a map of the microchip industry, like a map that points out where microchips are made. And of course, what seems to be obvious, especially if you're European, is that most of the microchips are being made in Asia. Lots of them in the United States, but lately, mostly, they're being developed in Asia. And I have a few numbers here that are interesting. Apparently, in 2014, China's government established what they call the National Integrated Circus Industry Investment Fund, which is, as it's easy name to remember, establishes a big fund that raised gazillions of billions of yens in its first round, and it was money from state-owned enterprises, though I don't know if you can say state-owned enterprises in China, because
it's a little bit of a...
They're basically all state-owned. And banks, and there was a lot of tax cuts to chip-related industries and developments and all that. And then the following year, 2015, China made the China 2025 commitment, which was to set out an industrial blueprint to upgrade China's manufacturing for microchips. And then, as a reaction, 4 years later, in 2019, the US Commerce Department banned telecom giant Huawei. We all followed this story over the news about how Trump declared war to Chinese companies, but most specifically to Huawei, who was, of course, working hard to develop the 5G network that they pretty much invented. And so, so they banned Huawei and other companies from buying parts and components from the US companies without government approval. And so the Trump administration claimed this was because Huawei endangered national security. And then 2 things happened. Also, as a follow-up from the fund and the China 2025, which is that the Chinese government ramped up the support and investment for for the development of microchip foundries, and pretty much every large Chinese tech company has announced a semiconductor-related project, very good funding. And then Huawei, because was not allowed to sell or buy microchips from the States, happened to stockpile 2 years worth of crucial chips needed for its 5G base stations, which were in cloud business, which were immensely useful or proved to be immensely useful during the lockdown and you know the other choke point related events. So if you look at the map, you will see that there is one country that is very, very tiny and that has the most amount of foundries in the planet. This is Taiwan, or more likely the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC. It has 11 foundries, is building a 12th one. It's a country with a population of 23 million people, so it's very small. And it just happens that since 1949, China split into 2 countries. There is the China we know, with Beijing as capital, and then the Republic of China, which we know as Taiwan. If you look at it in the map, it's like this little extrusion of island, which means that any point, any moment today, China will probably take final claim of Taiwan, incorporating the main foundries for the micro level microchips that exist in the planet. So I guess
well, I was just going to say, so obviously this is something that so this chip shortage, which actually, like Marta mentioned for a moment, is it was triggered by the pandemic, of course, in part because more people were staying home. Well, we all had to stay home, which led to an unexpected skyrocketed demand for personal computers, laptops, electronics, entertainment devices for home. Not just entertainment, right, but for work as well. We had to do everything at home, which is part of this triggered this shortage. And of course, this is concerning for the U.S. And as such, there was some legislation passed in the Senate earlier, which would provide something like $52 billion for chip research, and also provide funds for building fabs, chip fabrication plants in the U.S. But these aren't things you can just build overnight. It takes about 3 or 4 years, and as many $1 billion to build. So. Right. Sorry. One other thing I wanted to mention that was affected was not just consumer electronics, but also cars. Right. Like there have been lots of Ford was particularly hit hard. I mean, I think all the major car manufacturers have been hit hard by a chip shortage, and I read so many stories about there being lots of these new cars ready to go, which are being held up by 60 cents worth of hardware, because these days cars, well, for a while now, I think there's about a dozen microchips that cars need to run, and not just as the main brain of the car, whatever that might be, but just to even do things like turn vents on and off or turn signals or whatever. So yeah, it wasn't good.
It is. I was thinking, people tend to say that the factories in the States and in China are factories for not so small microchips, that the real small ones, like the real state-of-the-art chips, are being made in South Korea and in Taiwan. And we were discussing before, because most of the important things are made with the not so small microchip. But of course, we're talking the next generation of AI and also the space, industry and all this new era of the Anthropocene, I guess, that are dependent on extremely powerful, extremely small material.
Chips. Indeed, because that's the thing too. The chip shortage. So there's obviously different kinds of microchips, and there's extremely sophisticated ones, and then there's ones that are much more basic and lightweight. And for example, our phones, tablets, whatever, there is a brain, like you could call it that, microchip. But what actually the shortage was it wasn't those chips. It was the peripheral microchips that, well, like I mentioned with the cars, it wasn't like the microchips that were controlling the onboard computers. It was the seemingly less significant peripheral chips that were controlling things, as I mentioned, like turn signals and air vents, that there was the shortage for. So, but like you're saying, I mean, but having access to these kinds of lighter, more, these chips with more atomic functions, you could say, will become crucial as we find ourselves more in space and elsewhere, where it's absolutely critical to have access to this kind of technology.
Yeah, I was thinking about how this Superflux installations, Superflux, the British super amazing artist agency, they are making this these rooms for what, 2050? This projections of what a room would be like in London or in Singapore when it's 2050, and what will you be looking at through the window, etc. And one of the things that these rooms are full of, they are like state-of-the-art IoT objects being totally being totally useless because all the materials that are required to make them work are gone, or not relevant anymore in the state of climate affairs. So should we go to the next?
Which I think we have to jump. Yeah. So our next choking point is a very well-known one, of course, the coronavirus pandemic. Well, that's not the specific choking point we're going to talk about, because truthfully, the pandemic has been a meta choking point of choking points. It's really been like a house of cards of choking points, and there's just so many different bottlenecks which came up during this time. I mean, at first it was about protective gear, frontline workers having access to adequate protective gear as opposed to wearing garbage bags, which is what happened in many hospitals. And as well, hospital beds, tests, including all the components that go into, like the physical components, which make up the tests, swabs, plastic bags, and then of course there's the chemical components for processing the tests. And then, of course, there's been all kinds of bottlenecks with the vaccination, not just with the rollout, but with making enough vaccination. So there's been many. But what I wanted to focus on today was actually the tests, because, I mean, it's funny, like pandemic time, I find it's where something like last week feels like 10 years ago, but, a year ago can feel like a month ago. So anyway, if you can remember back, earlier in the pandemic, tests were a major issue. People weren't getting tested fast enough, and even if they were getting tested, the results weren't coming back fast enough. And one of the reasons why this was happening, well, there were actually three points that I wanted to mention. Well, one was, of course, the lack of chemical reagents, so-called, which were required for processing the test results. So, when you swab your nose and you put it in like a vial of liquid, there needs to then be chemicals that process that so that it can say whether it's positive or not. And I mean, there's very few labs that in the world which are capable of making these. It's actually an RNA extraction reagent, because it's a very specialized process which just normally isn't needed to be run as much as has been needed during the pandemic. And interestingly, this choking point around the test didn't so much affect the large, well-funded hospitals and labs, but it affected more the smaller hospitals and clinics, which of course, given that the entire world was coming down, was subject to this virus, we needed all hands on deck, and we saw And the place where we saw the biggest failures happening were indeed in these local regional centers, which is where just the whole testing chain broke down. And the reason for that is because the larger hospitals and labs have access to very expensive, all-in-one, self-contained platforms that they can send off tests to and get answers from, or get results from, but it's very expensive and it's not accessible to every local hospital who had to rely more on their own processes that they came up with, or just like kits that they had that they did themselves in their labs. And anyway, so the shortage of chemicals hit them the most. So there's this. The second shortage was around swabs themselves. In fact, there are two leading manufacturers of swabs, I've learned. One in Italy called Copen Diagnostics, and one in Maine in the US called Puritan Medical Products. And yeah, because it's not any swab, it's not just a Q-tip.
You mean the ones that go all the way,
yes,
all the way up to your brain?
The brain ticklers, yes.
The brain ticklers.
It's a very special kind of swab, apparently. And this is actually, I mean, this is an unfortunate, well, in the case of the pandemic, an unfortunate reality of these highly specialized processes is that indeed, like each step is very specialized, not just in terms of the materials, the equipment, the supplies, but also the staff, the chemicals, and then also the staff to both make the chemicals and, and run the tests. So anyway, as I said, the pandemic is like many choking points chained together. But the final one I wanted to talk about, which I did not expect, was apparently the fax machine was a choking point during the pandemic, because it turns out, and actually when I learned about this, I thought about it and I thought, it is actually true that the only place where I still see fax machines these days are in like my dentist office or my doctor's office. And so it turns out that, yeah, so the reason why fax machines are still so prevalent in medical offices is because they happen to be digitally, they happen to be compliant with digital privacy requirements, they somehow they've fallen through the cracks and made it so that offices did not have to upgrade their equipment because it happens to be compliant with privacy regulations. So anyway, so pandemic hit everybody. There were thousands of tests being run, and in some medical offices were literally receiving thousands of faxes a day. And and I read stories of people coming into the office and they're literally just being mountain of paper everywhere. That's obviously problematic, but there's this one quote I actually read from a New York Times story, which just blew my mind. The torrent of paper data led at least one health department to request additional forces. Washington State recently brought in 25 members of the National Guard to assist with manual data entry for results not reported electronically. So that really blew my mind. I never imagined that the National Guard would have to come in to do data entry, but that's where we got to with all this. So yeah.
You have to wonder if these privacy regulations are not made around the fax machine that was like the leading technology at the time, I guess.
You do have to wonder, yeah.
Because I mean, I cannot see how cryptography cannot solve that problem. But anyways,
yes.
it is, I think, this three choking points that you're mentioning. It makes me think like how, at some point, everything seemed to flow so well when, what's his name, Christian Dorsten came. Well, first of all, in China, how the Chinese scientists that were working on the virus situation came up with the DNA of the virus, and then literally, like less than a week afterwards, Christian Dorsten, who of course was thoroughly experienced with coronaviruses, came up with a test that was useful for this, and how it seemed that everything was going to go real fast, where open knowledge, open sharing of open data among working scientists was going to get this flowing real quick, and then we got stuck at the fucking swabs. Like I remember, I don't know, like Germany seemed to be really way ahead for quite a long time, but in Spain, like it took us 4 months of like heavy lockdown, like people not being able to leave their houses for anything more than like walking across the road and buying something to eat. And these stories of like, you know, all these test units coming to town and rotting in the wardrobes of the health ministry offices because they didn't have the swabs to go with them. So very interesting token point. Of course, it could have been even made worse by copyright, but we reserved that problem for the vaccines.
Yes. Yeah, so actually 2 other related choking points. Well, of course, there was a, the U.S. once again presented itself as a choking point in the pandemic, particularly with one particular policy move that the Trump administration made. I mean, they are largely faulted for the breakdown in the coronavirus response because as the needed response is a complex chain and many critical interdependencies in order for, as I mentioned earlier, you know, the protective gear, the testings, the vaccine rollout, you know, and there's a high degree of coordination that was required in order to do this response right. And there was, yes, it was the U.S. Defense Production Act, the DPA, which was enacted by Trump, which restricted the export of raw materials for vaccine production and for tests. Well, it affected tests as well in terms of restricting single-use materials like plastic bags, cell cultures, supplies, filters, bioreactors, everything. Then the whole supply chain was affected by this. And I was actually wondering if, and there was one other point that's related to how Trump handled the coronavirus response within the United States anyway. Instead of having there be a nationally, federally led response to the pandemic, he actually pushed it off to the states. So in a way, you know, instead of there being a central response, decentralized the response. But this, so I'm wondering if this is like kind of like reverse choking point where instead of there being this like central, you know, place that was coordinating how the response was going to go, pushing it off to the different states led to inconsistent, uncoordinated responses, which was, which did not fare well for the U.S. at all. And a couple other things in terms of vaccine, with the vaccine production, which is the most recent pandemic-related choking point we've been experiencing. I learned that there is the Serum Institute of India, which of course supplies India with which produces vaccine for India, as well 51 other nations in the world, including the UK. So the UK was actually very much affected by this because they just simply couldn't produce enough in time. And we're also lacking all the raw materials for even making the vaccine. So I mean, this is also another one that you could just unpack for days and days and days. Yeah. Yeah,
there's a lot to be said also by how this manifests a state of politics that are like both internally, like this thing that also happened in Spain and I think in most countries where the central government became irresponsible of the development of a response over the months. Like at first there was the shock and the response of like lockdown, etc. And then because the state of politics in most developed countries is a state of like extreme polarization and you know divided citizens in terms of mask wearing, vaccine taking, I don't know, all this somehow culture war politics of the day, then governments basically dropped their responsibilities over regional governments with with really interesting results, and also in the geopolitics scenario, how India, that basically is the one making medication, fabricating, manufacturing medication for the rest of the planet, is now the worst possible case of not having access to not only vaccines but all sorts of different necessary resources these days, while they are delivering this medications and vaccines to the rest of the world.
But I just want to say real fast, I think you could argue, though, that out of all those, choking points, that the reason why I thought that the testing was the worst is because had the testing been able to be carried out more efficiently and faster, it could have prevented all the other choking points which then followed it, just by simply hopefully reducing the volume of number of people who would become sick and would need all the other parts of that chain, from hospital beds to vaccination and so on and so forth.
And we're not even mentioning, considering the context, how the lack of testing somehow became like the leading justification for the development of all this COVID radar apps.
Yes.
This kind of like
surveillance,
surveillance, surveillance applications that only made sense if there was massive testing units everywhere, like they are right now in Germany, not in my country. But somehow, like this incongruence that this first choking point should have invalidated the development of these apps became exactly the opposite effect. Yeah. So let's move to the next one.
Shall I?
Yes. So this beautiful photograph, who is totally in the public domain, is a photo of lithium mines in Santiago de Chile, next to the Atacama Desert in the north of Chile. It was taken by one of their super amazing satellites. And the thing with lithium, of course, is that it seems to be the core component on the, let me say it right, the electrification of transportation in all our electronic gadgets, and apparently a lesser component for grid storage. And it just so happens that large deposits of lithium are locked into the Precambrian shield. And so the countries that have more lithium are Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile, yet again. So the material that is indispensable for, our next generation jump into a world of AI and autonomous cars and apparently long-distance surgery is dependent on the yet even deeper exploitation of mines in some of the poorest and more exploited countries in the world. This is underneath the Salar di Uyuni, which is the largest salt flat on Earth, stretching over 10,000 square kilometers, is where the largest single deposit of the raw material is. It also so happens that in order to get the lithium out of that material, you need to be pumping a lot of things that are like deeply polluting. And so the places where the pumping and the collecting of lithium are done tend to become wastelands real quick because of everything that is discarded after the material is selected and taken. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that lithium is absolutely indispensable for is batteries. And so the biggest buyer of lithium at this point happens to be a man called Elon Musk. People tend to say that Tesla is not really a car company, it's more of a lithium battery company. And so I was checking around, and it's, of course, predictably, most of the areas where there is enough lithium have become extremely dangerous places to be. For instance, one of the biggest mines of lithium in Central America, Latin America, is the Bacanora minerals in Mexico, and it happens to be in the desert of Sonora, where the Sinaloa cartel is strong, And now Google, Amazon, Facebook, and the Chinese are, of course, fighting for access to this extremely dangerous spaces. And some people say, even negotiating with some of the most dangerous people in the world. So the predictions are that we're running out of lithium by 2030, which is, it sounds like very, very close, no?
Yes.
And so one wonders, what do they know that we don't know, if they're like basing all their, like they're building all this development for AI and cars and et cetera, on a material that we know is not going to be available for longer than 10 years. And so it is, for me, obvious that that the solution happens to be in space.
Yes.
So I think we could maybe even move to our...
Well, the thing which actually this segues into our next point, just to say really quick that the choking point in terms of who is processing the lithium into batteries is, again, China. I was reading that they're doing 65% of that processing, and Elon Musk has has pronounced that he announced it on World Battery Day 2020, which I didn't know there was a World Battery Day, but there is. And he announced on that day that he would be producing lithium from clay found in Nevada, because apparently there is no significant domestic to the U.S. supply chain for lithium batteries, but which in fact brings us to our next choking point, which is the man himself, Elon Musk. Although you could almost like generalize this to billionaires, but we'll start with Elon Musk. So Elon Musk, obviously, as we know, has inserted himself into a lot of different industries. Electric vehicles, space exploration, tourism, brain-machine interfaces with Neuralink, satellite internet with Starlink. Not only that, he's exerted his ridiculous influence over financial markets, first with his own company, Tesla, when he announced in 2018, I'm considering taking Tesla private at $420, funding secured, which then got him in a lot of trouble with SEC and members of his board. He got sued for this and charged with fraud and had to pay, I think it was like, he himself personally had to pay, it was either, I think it was about $20 million or $40 million, which sounds like a slap on the wrist for him. And then Tesla as well had to pay.
But also, he had to stop tweeting for a while, which was
well,
much more hurtful.
That was the worst punishment of all, indeed. Obviously. But it didn't last that long. Then he, as some of you may or may not know, his relationship to Dogecoin and to Bitcoin. So one thing about the crypto markets is, of course, they're not regulated, which is which means that it's like a field day for Musk to just go there and say whatever he wants, whenever he feels like, which is exactly what he's been doing. And actually, this tweet came just before he started tweeting about Bitcoin and then eventually Dogecoin. Game stunk. So I don't know if how many of you are familiar with Wall Street Bets. It's this Reddit channel. Really interesting place. I've gone and checked it out a couple of times and then quickly left. So, so there was the whole GameStop, which is a struggling game store chain in the US.
Physical.
Yes, like a physical shop where you used to go and buy games before everything went online, which has been struggling for many years and was one of the most shorted stocks, or was perhaps even the most. If not, I don't know if that's true or not, but it was definitely one of the most shorted stocks on Wall Street. And Wall Street Bets members decided to force a short squeeze, which basically, so when a stock is heavily shorted, if suddenly the price rises very much, people are going to have their shorts called on them and lose a lot of money. So in order to prevent that from happening, they go back and buy more of the stock, which then basically creates this artificial increase in the valuation of the stock. So this was happening, and Elon Musk thought it was hilarious, and I guess as a show of support, made this tweet.
And stomped it.
Yes, but but he actually he had which very much excited the Wall Street Bets channel. But in any case, with Bitcoin. If any of you saw, he pronounced that you could now, he was going to, well, first he was thinking about allowing one to buy Tesla with Bitcoin, and then he actually enabled that, and it caused the price of Bitcoin to jump up in like a single 15-minute window. I think it was something like $6,000 or $7,000. It was significant. It was a huge jump, and but then later, more recently, has backtracked and said, no, you now cannot buy Tesla with Bitcoin because it's come to my attention that it's environmentally harmful, and I will not support this until I have received confirmation that 50% of all miners are mining via green methods or whatever. And then, the price comes back down. But it's not just affecting Bitcoin, it affects the entire crypto market, because the crypto, Ethereum is sort of called the crypto silver to Bitcoin's gold. Ethereum, then all the other altcoins follow the lead of Bitcoin. So I think like $1 trillion was wiped off the crypto market, in part from his tweets. So, and then on the other hand, Dogecoin, which was a joke, crypto created many years ago, which was trading for I think 1/1000th of a dollar for most of its life. I don't know exactly when Dogecoin, I remember hearing about Dogecoin first, gosh, I don't know, I'm just going to throw a number out there, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but it's been around for in terms of crypto timelines for a long time, worth very little. And
because it was a joke.
And it was a joke. Well, yeah, that's the thing, it was a joke. The mascot of Dogecoin is, of course, Doge, which is a Shiba Inu, I think is the breed dog. But anyway, Dogecoin got as high as 78 cents, which is thousands, it increased in value thousands of times. And Elon Musk has since tweeted images of SpaceX rockets with Doge on it. There's been rumors of him sending Doge to the moon, whatever that means. Anyway, the guy obviously is having a lot of fun with this, but it's making some people lots of money, but it's also losing people lots of money, and it's I would say that's a pretty significant choking point.
Well, there is also a lot to be said about how in this moment where money is more concentrated than ever before, I don't know, feudal times, after feudal times, I guess. Even just this frame where he allows people to buy Teslas with Bitcoin. How he's doing something that should be totally illegal, no? Because, on one hand, he's an investor and his friends are investors, so Bitcoin, lifts, I don't know, 6 times fold or something like that. But also he's selling a lot of Teslas because they become this almost non-fungible object where you can basically put all your Bitcoins and let them rise in price. And it's a good investment for your dodgy Bitcoin material.
And not only that, but when he announced, I just want to say really fast, when he announced that that Tesla had bought $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin, that suddenly became worth a lot more than that with his tweet, It's directly lining his own pockets through these tweets, which were crypto a regulated industry, I feel like it would be fraudulent.
Lining his pockets, yes. And cleaning a lot of money for his friends, which is already an interesting problem. If it was not because this guy is the leading manager of a number of interrelated projects that, of course, have to do with space and AI and the internet in climate challenging
every
times.
Critical potential industry, not even potential, but industry of the future. He's considered, he's kind of a gatekeeper of the future.
We wanted to finish with this precisely because all the choke points that we've been talking about before like somehow converge
Yeah.
into this
Yes.
particular vortex of a
Yeah.
creature that is helping his own company and his friends to clean a lot of money, meaning that like his main SpaceX project, like is supposed to be like taking humanity to Mars. But what he's basically doing is putting satellites on space to surveil what's happening in the planet Earth, while resources are being more and more valuable every day. At the same time, he has managed to create a net of nano satellites, and that somehow becoming legal. He will be one of the probably the only provider of satellite internet when all the other infrastructures, like for instance the undersea cables or the other land bound like antennas, etc., will be challenged by either weather events or just basic decay.
Or taken over by new people's alternative internet, but that's another discussion.
Exactly. And also, like his Mars project, which is not really a Mars project, is a project for looking for lithium-like materials in other planets. It's an extracting project. So all these problems that we were pointing out before end up literally circling around the same one guy who is more famous for tweeting about GameStop and basically speculating with a free market.
I mean, think about this. Elon Musk is a meme. He has become a meme. Basically, our future is being gate-kept by a meme. This is where we're at.
Exactly. And I think we can leave it here.
Yeah.
Daniela, right on time.
Right on time.
And see...
Oh.
Yeah, it's a comment from the chat from Ina, from the chat. 1 second. I would find it interesting to think about these reflections on infrastructures, property and power, and the reflections on the dynamics in a pandemic and the different supply chains together with the questions of conspiracy narratives. It's more a comment. And then she says, because I can't really name this precisely, the important considerations and discussions of you two are, after all, also picking together something like snippets of knowledge and discussing different dynamics. And then she says, the step to the conspiracy narrative doesn't seem to me at all so far away, if one would try to make a coherent narrative out of it.
Yeah, I mean, given that we kind of are indirectly and also directly implying that the concentration of power is within a small handful of people who obviously all know each other, I can totally see how it could be attractive to start to, think about that. Conspiracy theories. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm always hesitant to. I mean, conspiracy theories are so like super juicy and in a dark way entertaining to like discuss, but like kind of hook into this really emotional part of us, which I mean, yeah. But I can definitely see how one would start to consider that because it does. It seems feasible, right? But
that this is all a big conspiracy theory.
That they're. That since indeed like power is concentrated in a few hands, that maybe they're all coordinating how they pull levers. Although despite that, I mean, one would think that, there are still, many thousands, I mean, I don't know how many, lots of people beneath like the top group of people. I mean, you would think there'd be some checks and balances in there and whistleblowers, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, of course, when it comes to things like the isotopes, the swabs, and the reasons why some parts of a vaccine might be here but cannot be used for that like all these empty pockets of knowledge, of not knowledge, but of information, tend to be filled with, of course, with conspiracy theories. But I think in this case, especially in this last case, what we have, or I think actually in the last 20 years, what we have had is that infrastructures have somehow followed two different paths, like one visible path, like a narrative of a certain sort, and then the invisible path of the actual development that has pretty much run in the opposite direction, no? And you see it in the language of, of like freedom, and in the language of the cloud, and how all these metaphors have been occupying the space of real information with images of things that are literally the opposite of what the infrastructure is doing. Exactly. I can see how conspiracy theories can grow in both sides. And
opacity encourages conspiracy theory, indeed, to fill in the gaps of knowledge, like you're saying, or information.
Exactly
what
not
you
only
said.
not only the gaps, but in this case, like the incongruence of it all. No, like the cognitive dissonance that these situations create.
Yeah.
Like all this Wall Street, all this GameStop scenario, which for me, I mean, even I was like, in the deep end of some conspiracy theories there, because it's very hard to believe that something that resembles so much what happened, for instance, with the Russian intervention in the 2016 elections, where there were literally Russian agents creating like entire communities around things like Black Lives Matter, though in this case it was called Blacktivist, groups that actually had more followers and users than Black Lives Matter, just to mess around with people. Like you have to wonder if no one is using something like Wall Street Bets, which is, a forum online to basically make money on the side while sending a lot of memes about, I don't know, like the 300 to a whole bunch of kids with nothing to do in their hands because they are in lockdown, and a lot of money because, they don't have anything to spend it in. So I think this cognitive dissonances of things happening in ways that are unexplainable unless you believe the narrative, like the superficial marketing narrative of it all. Like all these newspapers opening with like, the little guy has give it to, has showed the fist to Wall Street. It's like, seriously? Is that what we're saying when they're using a tool that is literally funded by Wall Street to tell Wall Street guys what all the million of little guys are investing in together? I mean, how is that not a cognitive dissonance that will clearly lead you to some conspiracy theories? So yes, I guess there is enough room for those in this scenarios.
Yeah. She has one more comment.
Okay.
Maybe we can have that more comment.
It is so hot in here.
Then we have another question in the audience, and I got an image that was sent. So it is that short that I just say,
okay. She just added something. At first she said, of course, you both don't make conspiracy narratives. That was her comment. And she said, it is maybe, especially in your present digital cultures, a thin line between criticism and conspiracy, ? Or paranoia, in brackets.
I'm a Spanish. I don't think my English is.
No, actually, I don't. Yeah.
Understand the nuances of that question.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Actually, I'm not sure the question either. Wait, can we hear it one more time?
Tell her also that it's like 1,000,000 degrees here. Like I feel my brain is melting. I can feel my brain pouring.
So she said, is it maybe especially in your digital cultures a thin line between criticism and conspiracy?
In our digital catches, that's the part.
Yeah, that's what she says.
Okay, wait.
She says no, thank you for your answer, but yeah.
Was that
Maybe we have to add that we had a session on conspiracy theories before, so probably she was watching both, and now it's like kind of connecting what you were talking about and or a previous guest.
So it's a question where like, are we ourselves sort of considering whether or not these are conspiracy theories, or are we just being more critical? More critical in our approach. Is that? I'm sorry, I'm just like not really clear on what the.
I think let's just do this. Let's go for the image and then let her rephrase into something that is somehow more direct.
Yeah. She says now in our present digital patches. But maybe you can send it to me and I can send it on your
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, that sounds good.
While I send you the image, you can pass the microphone to the other person in the audience.
Digital catches?
Who was first? Yeah, thank you very much for the nice talk. So you pointed out some, let's say, platform capitalism, don't know, examples in different infrastructure fields and point out all the problems linked with it. And I was interested, and now in the end, you even called Elon Musk the gatekeeper of our future. And I was interested if you have also like a more positive narrative, or if you can imagine examples of a more positive future with like decentralized platforms that could probably fight this capitalism problem, or if you really see this as the only solution for the future. Elon is the gatekeeper, and if he keeps the gate closed, then we are fucked, kind of. Like it seems a little bit, I mean, it's really nice that you showed all the problems. But it seems a little bit like there's just one solution, there's just one way.
Well, I mean, let's remember this is called the choking point, the choking pong game.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
but glad you asked that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, indeed, like the focus of this was to actually highlight these points. But in fact, I mean, for myself, like my entire art practice and teaching practice is actually around what the alternative is. You know, it's focused on studying decentralized technology itself, like peer-to-peer networks, mesh networks, local community networks, like Freifunk here in Berlin is one example, of course, and also the communities that build these infrastructures for themselves, as well as this idea of technological sovereignty, which has two meanings. One is a very terrible meaning that is associated with authoritarian governments who use it as a benign-sounding term to basically enact authoritarian practices over their own citizens in terms of how and when and for which purpose they can use the internet. But technological sovereignty has a positive definition actually in terms of communities, which basically says that communities have the right to build their own infrastructures, their own tools in order to set their own rules and to protect themselves as well and their own data, and to retain ownership over the physical infrastructure and the data, like their own data that's running over the infrastructure. So, I mean, I hope that there is, an alternative to all this and and positive outcomes that can come out of this. Of course, the challenge there is it is difficult. I mean, there are these community networks. There are, of course, like in place of Twitter, there's Mastodon, which is like a federated, you can like self-host your own Mastodon server, sort of Twitter-like application. I mean, there are, instead of Google, there's like Nextcloud you can run for managing documents and such and host it on your own computer if you want. I mean, there are, of course, decentralized self-hosted alternatives, which, like I say, is the entire focus of my practice. So I would like to believe that there are, of course, positive alternatives and things that we can do. Just the tricky thing is getting mass adoption, because the thing is, you're talking about people that have no budgets or very small budgets going up against like soon probably trillionaires, so it's just, I think I don't think it's going to be all dark or all light. I think it'll be the ongoing battle between dark and light, as it always is, between, dominant powers and then, everyone else. So, yeah. Does that answer pretty much, sort of? Which part's missing?
No, totally, it's answering. I was just, like, do you also know, like, a grassroots thing of the lithium problem in 10 years? What's going to happen then? Like the
yes.
really big problems?
Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, do we know of, like, for example, a grassroots example of lithium production? I mean, well, for lithium production itself, no, I don't. I mean, my focus is mostly on network media and the internet and such. So I have a lot of examples for those. For example, I mean, this is like a whole other can of worms I don't necessarily want to open up, but like many people say that in terms of financial markets, like cryptocurrency is supposed to be doing that, like removing central banks and putting banking and financial services in the hands of citizens. But, you know, of course, there's a whole other host of issues associated with that in terms of like, you know, the testing choking point or the lithium batteries or Suez Canal. I mean, these are much more difficult because they're highly specialized, expensive processes, you know.
I mean, first of all, Sarah is way too humble to mention the fact that she runs a festival for many years called Radical Networks, RadNets, that is dedicated specifically to that.
It's true.
You can check it online. It has a long archive of amazing projects from all parts of the world.
Actually, if you go to radicalnetworks.org/archives, there's 5 years of talks and workshops and of people addressing these issues. So, yeah.
Exactly. But very interesting like point about the lithium, because for me, it is exactly the same problem everywhere, which means that all the logistics that we are dependent on are based on the hyper-centralization of a hyper-consuming, you know, wheel of sorts. We probably don't need that much lithium. That's the thing. We probably don't need to have a smartphone, each one of us. We probably, like, one of the things that I really like about the projects in Latin America, for instance, around this logic is Latin America for me is like the past and the future of technology because they have so little of that that they are building their own in ways that are extremely creative. And so, for instance, when you start thinking about how to network a village that is in the middle of the mountains, it becomes very weird, the idea that each person will have a phone, no? Or that each person will have one connection in their homes. Like, this is a logic that comes from the privatization of the operators that used to be public and want to sell each one of us, or that each building we have will have, I don't know, 12 different connections instead of having just one, or that each one of us will have like a server in our house called the PC or the laptop, when we could all have the same server in the building and share resources, etc. Or that each one of us will be connecting to an operator far away that we don't have access to when we could connect to each other. Like the fact that most of our technology is actually capable of creating like immediate networks, but is designed to go to an antenna first and probably work around the world like a few times, so it leaves a print in every single server that it goes through. So we are like, you know, well tracked by a number of like unknown data brokers and digital platforms. Like, all that logic requires a lot of lithium. It requires a lot of power, a lot of energy, a lot of people buying phones, a lot of people living in their own, you know, little apartments with their own little computer, with their own little batteries, etc. It requires all that, but it's a logic that we don't need to abide for when we're thinking things from scratch. Other logic that we have is that we need to connect to people in Texas or in Singapore or in, like, because, you know, the digital platforms that are now basically they're like the real infrastructure of the internet, because most of the traffic goes through them. They are interested in pulling you away from the place where you physically are, here, for instance, and connecting you with people that dress the same as you, or listen to the same music as you, or like the same movies as you somewhere else. This is interesting because that means that you need their services in order to be with your community. But that's not a community. You don't need, you know, lithium to have a community. You just need to think things in a different way. I am very fond of this little projects in different parts of the Amazon, where, you know, people are just happy to connect to their neighbor and to make sure that they can talk to the teacher and that they can talk to the, I don't know, to the priest and to the fireman, which are the 3 most important people in their community. And that's that. And then the rest of the things, they just do it on the square. They just go into the square and they talk to each other. And all their infrastructure is being built around necessity and you know, and climatic challenges like fires and floods and things like that, so they can gather together, know what to do, and be organized. And this is, and they are finding ways to connect to people on the other side of the forest, just when they have to, not by default, because it might be unnecessary. And so I am convinced that we don't need lithium for that, that we can do with a lot less lithium. Like, we don't need to spend all the lithium we have, like by 2030, if we don't need to do all these other things. Sorry, very long answer.
Great.
You just have to stop capitalism, and then I think
And then everything will be fine.
in the next 10 years.
Easy. Should we, okay, so this was...
The image that I was sent with the name of the city.
Yes, the name of the city. Oh, oops. Ah, yes, it's behind here. So, Agbablushi, the toxic city.
So I guess we're talking about waste.
Yes.
No?
Yes, that's what it looks like.
That's a choke point of its own.
Yeah.
Because, you know, one of the things that we learned with the pandemic is that something, by the fact that something is happening, I don't know, like 8,000 kilometers away from you, or in a distant area of China, doesn't mean that it doesn't affect you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of, well, and also just in terms of consumerism in general, like the amount of electronics waste that's generated. It also reminds me, it makes me think of the images I've seen of villages in India where they live on the banks of a river of plastic that's being constantly processed. I mean, yeah, indeed, what do we do with all that waste?
Yeah, also because as we fashionably remove the plastic straws and replace them by something that we had all this time, which is like pasta, pretty fun, we are turning to a different kind of waste, no? As I was saying, like lithium mining, which is now, you know, becoming like severely intense, leaves behind, like, you know, an immense amount of toxic waste, and it's not the only metal that is being unearthed for this operations. So yeah, we are at a choking point. The promise, to go back to Elon Musk, is that we have wasted this planet and we can go to the next one. But one of the things that I'm always laughing about is the idea that people think that if we go to the next one, first of all, we're all going.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And secondly, it's already happening. Like, you know, Jeff Bezos the other day, he announced that he was going to space on the 20th of July. Like, hi, well, this morning I just decided that me and my brother and some rich guy that bought a ticket are going to space on the 20th of July. And so what that is saying to people is, it's happening. Yeah. We got it. We got you guys. We're all going to space. And how this fantasy, you know, of being colonizers in our own planet, or of being a species other than animals, of being, you know, like an object that fell from space and can go back to it and find a better home, is stopping us from just, you know, contributing to this waste with like meaningful. I wouldn't even say consuming habits, because it's not about consuming habits. Yeah. About meaningful, I don't know, political action, collective action, and inaction also.
Well, no? and also without the, you know, the companies that are responsible for creating the devices or consumer goods that then turns into this waste, they don't seem to concern themselves so much with that part. You know, they're like, oh, it'll just be sent to somewhere in India or Africa, and you know, not my concern. You know, perhaps because they are thinking in the back of their minds, because we're going to be on Mars.
Exactly.
So,
but also,
yeah.
there's all this idea of the clean energy, you know, like Elon Musk was saying, I just discovered, it just occurred to me that Bitcoin is using a lot of energy.
As if he didn't know that already, though.
Exactly.
I mean, like, it's just...
But it's like, as long as half of the energy that they use is clean energy, which is like, you know, once you have enough money to basically buy your way out, which is like moving your darkness into another place, then we should be fine. Which is a problem when it comes to technologies that 5 years ago were unthinkable and now we're all talking about, like geoengineering, you know, solutions for extreme weather conditions and stuff.
But also just when incredibly wealthy and connected people like Elon Musk, you know, say, oh, we're not going to accept Bitcoin until it's more green. It's like, dude, can't you of all people help make that happen?
Exactly.
I mean, why? Yeah, it's like why? Yeah, no, but it's like, you know, that's what really steams me. I mean, I know that, you know, aside from being an incredibly powerful, well-connected billionaire, Elon Musk is only one man, but it just feels, just in general, just feels so disingenuous to like push the responsibility off onto, you know, onto people who are much less wealthy, much less well-connected. You know, I feel like, I mean, I will never be a billionaire, so maybe it's easy for me to speculate like this. But if I were a billionaire and I knew all the people that Elon Musk knew, and I had literally 1 million businesses in all different parts of industry and infrastructure, and I cared about that, maybe I would do something like significant.
Well, I think this is an excellent place to finish, and let's all make sure that Sarah becomes a millionaire.
Billionaire.
A billionaire, sorry. And so we can save the world.
Yes, great. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have to stop because actually there were more questions in the chat, there were more questions in the audience, there were more images to send you. There was really a great response to what you've been telling and what you've been discussing. So thank you very much. And I can only invite the audience, the few people that are here, to maybe ask you directly and engage and have a coffee or something here. Yes, I think we all need water and maybe some other drinks as well. Exactly. So yes, thank you really very much for being here, for coming, for being here in real life in 3D. And thank you to the audience for engaging and sending things and commenting and questioning and asking. And I invite you, we have a break of 30 minutes only now. This is why we have to be very punctual. We have to make a quick change of setup. And the next lecture, or the next performance actually, will start at 4 p.m. With the title Becoming Human, Animal, Plant, Rocks, Air, Modes of Perceiving Nature, with Birgit Schneider and Kate Donovan. And it will be a listening session, so audio only session. And yeah, I can only warmly recommend to join. And I hope you'll be there at 4 p.m. again. Thank you.